The conference chamber floated in the neutral zone between Earth's orbital defense grid and the outer marker buoys, where the Galactic Assembly had anchored their diplomatic fleet. It was a transparent dome, 60 meters across, with nothing but the black void and distant stars pressing in from all sides. Inside, the air smelled sterile, recycled through filters that couldn't quite mask the chemical tang of alien biology. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Grayson stood near the back wall, arms crossed, watching the proceedings with the kind of quiet intensity that came from too many years in military intelligence. He wasn't supposed to be here. His orders had been clear. Observe, record, report. Nothing more. But standing there, watching Earth's diplomatic team smile and nod while the aliens dictated terms like they were reading a grocery list, something cold settled in his gut. The Vakri delegation sat across the curved table, 3 of them, each nearly 3 meters tall with elongated limbs and faces that looked like someone had stretched human features over an insect's skull. Their skin shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that shifted color when they spoke, a visual language Thomas had studied but never fully understood. The lead diplomat, whose name translated roughly to harmonizer of disputes, gestured with one 4-fingered hand, and the translation device embedded in the table's surface converted his clicks and whistles into flat, emotionless English. "The terms are non-negotiable," the harmonizer said. "Earth will dismantle 70% of its military fleet within 6 standard months. All advanced weapons research will be submitted to Assembly oversight. Trade routes will be administered by Assembly-appointed regulators. In exchange, humanity will be granted associate membership status and access to limited commercial networks." Ambassador Patricia Klein, Earth's lead negotiator, kept her smile fixed in place. She was good at that. Decades of diplomatic service had turned her face into a mask that revealed nothing. But Thomas saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers pressed too hard against the datapad in front of her. "Harmonizer," she said carefully, "these terms represent a significant reduction in our defensive capabilities. Given the recent Krellian incursions near the Tau Ceti colonies, we have legitimate security concerns." The harmonizer's skin flashed orange and yellow, patterns that Thomas's implant translated as dismissive amusement. "The Krellian situation is precisely why these measures are necessary. Your species has demonstrated a concerning tendency toward aggression. The Assembly cannot risk allowing a nascent military power to destabilize the region. You must understand, humanity is not being punished. You are being protected from your own worst instincts." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. Protected. As if humans were children who couldn't be trusted with sharp objects. As if the Krellian raids that had killed 8,000 colonists in the last year were somehow Earth's fault for existing in the wrong neighborhood. Another alien spoke up. This one from a species called the Torven, squat and broad, with thick scales and eyes that glowed like embers. "The decision has been made by consensus of 47 member species. Earth may accept these terms and join the galactic community, or Earth may remain isolated without access to transit lanes or trade. Choose wisely." Ambassador Klein opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, every display panel in the conference chamber flickered. The lights dimmed for half a second, then stabilized. Thomas's neural implant buzzed with an incoming priority message, encrypted with codes he hadn't seen used in 3 years. He accessed it with a thought, and the text scrolled across his vision. "Titan-class deployment authorized. Arrival in 90 seconds. Do not react. Maintain position." His heart kicked hard against his ribs. Titan-class. There were only 3 of them, and they weren't supposed to exist. Officially, the United Earth Defense Force had decommissioned the program after the Treaty of Mars, declared it too expensive, too dangerous, too much like preparing for a war nobody wanted to admit was coming. But Thomas had seen the classified reports. He knew what they'd really done. They'd kept building. The harmonizer's skin flashed red, and he tilted his head, insect-like, toward one of his aides. "We are detecting a gravitational anomaly. Large mass displacement approaching at superluminal velocity." The Torvan delegate's scales rippled with agitation. "This neutral zone is restricted. No vessels are authorized to enter during diplomatic proceedings." Ambassador Klein's mask slipped for just a moment, and Thomas saw something flicker in her eyes. Not surprise. Knowledge. She'd known this was coming. The conference chamber's external sensors projected a holographic display above the table, showing the surrounding space in real time. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, at the edge of the display, reality seemed to fold in on itself, a distortion that made Thomas's eyes water just looking at it. Space rippled like fabric, and then, as if it had always been there but his brain had only just decided to acknowledge it, the ship appeared. It was monstrous. The Vakri diplomatic frigate, which had seemed impressively large when Thomas first saw it, looked like a rowboat next to an aircraft carrier. The Titan-class vessel stretched nearly 4 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull a dark alloy that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It bristled with weapon systems, rail cannons the size of skyscrapers, missile batteries that could level continents, and energy projection arrays that glowed with barely contained power. The ship's presence changed the fabric of space around it, generating a gravitational field strong enough that the conference chamber's stabilizers kicked in with an audible hum. The silence in the chamber was absolute. The harmonizer stood, his bioluminescence flashing through a rapid sequence of colors Thomas's implant couldn't translate fast enough. "What is the meaning of this? This is a violation of diplomatic protocols. This is an act of aggression." Ambassador Klein stood as well, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, almost pleasant. "Harmonizer, I apologize for the interruption. It seems one of our defensive vessels was in the area and decided to check in." The harmonizer's skin flashed crimson, a color Thomas's implant finally translated with clarity. Fury mixed with something that looked a lot like fear. "A defensive vessel does not require armaments capable of destroying planetary bodies. This is intimidation. This is a threat to the sovereignty of this diplomatic assembly." Ambassador Klein tilted her head slightly, and Thomas recognized that gesture. He'd seen it in briefings, in negotiation simulations, in the recordings of her most famous diplomatic victories. It was the moment she stopped playing defense and went for the throat. "Intimidation?" she said softly. "Harmonizer, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of this meeting. You see, we came here under the impression this was a negotiation, but listening to your terms, your non-negotiable demands, your insistence that we disarm ourselves while Krellian raiders butcher our colonies, well, it became clear that you didn't come here to negotiate at all. You came here to dictate, and humanity doesn't respond well to dictation." The Torvan delegate slammed one thick hand against the table, and the metallic surface rang like a gong. "You dare threaten the Galactic Assembly? You, a species that has barely achieved basic faster-than-light travel? We have 47 member species, thousands of warships, economic power that spans 100 systems. Earth is one planet. One. Single. Planet. You cannot possibly believe you can stand against the combined might of civilized space." Thomas watched Ambassador Klein's face, and for the first time since he'd met her 4 years ago, he saw her smile. Really smile. Not the diplomatic mask, not the practiced expression of professional courtesy, but something genuine and cold and utterly without mercy. "You're right," she said. "We can't stand against the combined might of 47 species. But here's the thing about combinations, about alliances, about assemblies built on consensus and committee decisions. She gestured toward the viewport, toward the massive warship hanging in space, like a promise of violence. They require consensus. They require time. They require 47 different governments to agree on strategy, on tactics, on who pays for what and who gets credit for victory. And while you're having those meetings, those endless diplomatic sessions, those careful deliberations about proportional response and acceptable casualties, she leaned forward, palms flat on the table. We'll be burning your worlds. The conference chamber erupted. The harmonizer's entire body flashed with bioluminescent patterns so rapid they looked like seizures of light. 3 more alien delegates, species Thomas didn't immediately recognize, began speaking at once, their translation devices overlapping into a cacophony of outrage and threats. The Torvan delegate stood, his massive frame radiating aggression, scales rippling with colors that needed no translation. But Ambassador Klein didn't move. She stood there, calm as stone, and waited for the noise to die down. Thomas's implant buzzed again. Another encrypted message, this one from someone with authorization codes 3 levels above his clearance. Target lock acquired on all assembly vessels. Firing solution uploaded. Weapons hot. Awaiting command. His pulse hammered in his ears. This was insane. This was how wars started. Real wars. The kind that burned across star systems and left nothing but radiation and wreckage. Earth's entire strategy for the last 50 years had been peaceful integration, careful diplomacy, presenting themselves as harmless and eager to join the galactic community. And now they were throwing it all away, gambling everything on one show of force. The harmonizer finally regained enough composure to speak, though his skin still flickered with agitated colors. This is madness. You would start a war over trade regulations and defensive limitations? Your species will be annihilated. Maybe, Ambassador Klein said. Probably, actually. But here's what you need to understand about humans, Harmonizer. We're really spectacularly good at one thing. We're good at spite. We're good at going down swinging. You know what Earth used to be like? Before we unified? We had hundreds of nations, thousands of cultures, and we spent millennia killing each other over pieces of dirt and philosophical differences. We built weapons that could sterilize our entire planet, and we came within minutes of using them multiple times. We nearly destroyed ourselves out of pure, stubborn refusal to back down. That's our legacy. That's what we bring to the galactic community. She walked around the table, and Thomas noticed the alien delegates leaning back, creating distance. Even the Torvan, who stood twice her height and probably quadrupled her mass, shifted away. So yes, Klein continued, you could destroy Earth, eventually. Your 47 species could assemble a fleet, could coordinate an attack, could overwhelm our defenses. But how many of your worlds burn first? How many of your colonies become radiation zones? How many of your civilians die while your governments argue about acceptable losses? She stopped directly in front of the harmonizer, close enough that the alien's bioluminescence cast colored shadows across her face. And here's the really important question. Which of your species volunteers to be first? Because that ship out there, and the 2 others like it, they can move faster than your sensor networks can track. They can appear in orbit over your homeworlds before your defense fleets can mobilize. So who wants to be the example? Who wants to be the cautionary tale we tell the rest of the galaxy? The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Thomas could hear the hum of the life support systems, the faint creak of the station's stabilizers adjusting to the Titan-class ship's gravitational presence. He could hear his own heartbeat, too fast, too loud. The harmonizer's skin had gone pale, almost translucent. This is not how civilized species conduct diplomacy. No, Klein agreed. It's not. Civilized species apparently conduct diplomacy by showing up with overwhelming numbers, making demands they know can't be refused, and dressing up extortion as trade negotiation. But we're not civilized by your standards, are we? We're the violent newcomers, the aggressive primitives who can't be trusted, so we're speaking a language we think you'll understand better than words." Another alien delegate, this one humanoid but with gray skin and large black eyes, spoke up. Her voice was softer than the others, less aggressive. "What is it you want? If not assembly membership, if not access to our trade networks, what is the purpose of this display?" Ambassador Klein turned to face the new speaker, and her expression softened slightly. "What we want is simple. We want to be left alone. We want to develop at our own pace, make our own mistakes, chart our own course. We want to defend our colonies without asking permission from a committee that's never seen a Corellian raider and doesn't care about our losses. And most importantly, we want it understood by everyone in this room and everyone they report to that Earth is not a prize to be claimed or a problem to be managed. We're a sovereign power, and we will act like one." The gray-skinned delegate considered this for a long moment. "The Assembly will not accept this. They will view it as rebellion, as a threat to the established order." "Let them," Klein said. "Let them view it however they want, but make sure they understand the cost of enforcement." Thomas's implant buzzed once more. "Assembly vessels powering weapons systems. Defensive posture only. No targeting locks detected." The harmonizer seemed to deflate, his rigid posture slouching into something that looked almost defeated. "You are making a terrible mistake. The galaxy is vast, and there are powers far greater than anything in this room, powers that will not tolerate defiance." "Then we'll deal with them when they arrive," Klein said. "But today, right now, you're going to go back to your assembly and deliver a message. Tell them Earth declines their generous offer of associate membership. Tell them we'll be establishing our own trade routes, defending our own territory, and pursuing our own interests. And tell them that any attempt to enforce their will through economic sanctions or military pressure will be met with immediate and disproportionate retaliation." She walked back to her position at the table, gathered her datapad, and looked at Thomas. "Commander Grayson, I believe our business here is concluded. Prepare for departure." Thomas nodded, not trusting his voice. The enormity of what had just happened was still processing, still trying to fit itself into his understanding of how the universe worked. Earth had just declared independence from a galactic order, 47 species strong. They'd done it with 3 warships, and the kind of reckless courage that was either brilliant or suicidal, and he genuinely didn't know which. The shuttle ride back to Earth's orbital station was silent. Ambassador Klein sat across from Thomas in the cramped passenger compartment, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and controlled. She looked exhausted, like someone who'd just run a marathon while carrying a mountain on her back. Thomas wanted to say something, wanted to ask her if she understood what she'd just done, what kind of chaos she'd just unleashed, but the words wouldn't come. His training told him to wait, to observe, to let superior officers speak first. So he sat there, watching the stars slide past the viewport, and tried not to think about how fragile that transparent polymer really was, how little separated them from the absolute nothing of space. When they docked at Station Meridian, Earth's primary military outpost in the outer solar system, the atmosphere had changed. Personnel moved with urgency. Not quite running, but close to it. Officers clustered in groups, speaking in low voices that cut off when Thomas and Klein passed. The usual casual efficiency of station operations had been replaced by something sharper, more focused. War footing, Thomas realized. They were preparing for war. Admiral James Cortez was waiting for them in the command center, a circular room dominated by holographic displays showing every ship, satellite, and defensive platform within 10 million kilometers of Earth. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with gray hair cut military short and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. Thomas had served under him during the Mars Rebellion, back when the outer colonies had decided independence sounded better than Earth governance. Cortez had put that down with minimal casualties and maximum intimidation, and he'd earned a reputation as someone who understood that violence, properly applied, could prevent more violence later. "Ambassador," Cortez said, his voice carrying the flat affect of someone who'd moved past shock into pure operational mode. "I've been getting very interesting reports from our intelligence assets. Apparently, half the Galactic Assembly wants your head on a pike, and the other half wants to pretend this meeting never happened." Klein opened her eyes and managed a thin smile. "Only half want me dead? I must be losing my touch." "This isn't funny, Patricia," Cortez said, and the use of her first name made Thomas straighten. These two had history, enough that professional distance could be dropped. "Do you have any idea what you've started? The political fallout alone could isolate us for generations, and if they decide to call our bluff—" "It's not a bluff," Klein interrupted. "The Titan-class ships are operational. The targeting solutions are ready. If they come for us, we burn their worlds. That was always the plan." Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. Always the plan. This hadn't been a desperate gambit, hadn't been Klein going off script in a moment of inspired madness. This had been coordinated at the highest levels, signed off by people whose clearance made his look like a child's permission slip. Cortez ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking every one of his 57 years. The plan was supposed to be deterrence through uncertainty. Keep the Titan-class program classified, let rumors circulate, make them wonder what we were capable of. Not park one in front of their diplomatic fleet and threaten to glass their homeworlds. "Plans change," Klein said. "You weren't in that room, James. You didn't hear how they talked about us, like we were pets that needed training. Like our dead colonists were acceptable losses in their grand scheme of galactic stability. They were going to force us into a corner, strip away our defenses, and leave us dependent on their mercy. And when the next crisis came, when the Krellians or someone worse decided Earth looked like easy prey, the Assembly would hold another meeting and debate the proper response while we died." She stepped closer to the display, showing Earth, that blue and white marble floating in the dark. "I wasn't going to let that happen. None of us were." Thomas found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Ma'am, with respect, threatening 47 species with total war seems like it might generate the exact crisis you're trying to prevent." Klein turned to look at him, and her expression softened slightly. "Commander Grayson, how long have you been in military intelligence?" 14 years, ma'am." "Then you understand game theory. You understand that sometimes the only way to avoid a fight is to make absolutely certain your opponent knows you'll win it, or at least make victory so costly it's not worth attempting." She gestured to the holographic display, where red markers indicated the positions of various assembly vessels throughout the solar system. "They outnumber us. They have more resources, more technology, more of everything, but they also have something we don't. They have comfort. They have centuries of established order, of conflicts resolved through diplomacy and economic pressure. They've forgotten what real war costs, what it means to fight an enemy that's willing to sacrifice everything for survival." Admiral Cortez pulled up another display, this one showing a star map with hundreds of systems marked in different colors. "Even assuming we could execute strikes against multiple targets simultaneously, we don't have the numbers to hold territory. We'd be conducting hit-and-run operations against an enemy with functionally unlimited reinforcements. That's not a war. That's slow suicide." "It's not about holding territory," Klein said. It's about making them understand that peace is cheaper than war. Every world we hit, every colony we destroy, that's political capital they have to spend. Those are votes they lose, constituents they have to answer to, investigations and inquiries and demands for accountability. The assembly runs on consensus, and consensus breaks down real fast when people start dying. Some species will want revenge, sure, but others will start asking why they're risking their people for a fight that doesn't concern them. They'll start questioning whether enforcing assembly authority over one stubborn species is worth the cost. Thomas listened to this strategy being laid out and felt something shift in his understanding of the last 4 hours. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't even courage. This was calculated ruthlessness, a willingness to weaponize Earth's weakness and turn it into a kind of strength. They couldn't win a conventional war, so they were threatening an unconventional one, the kind where victory conditions didn't matter because everyone lost. "There's something else," Cortez said, his voice dropping lower. Intelligence intercepted communications from the Krellian Empire. They're watching this situation very carefully. If the Assembly commits significant forces to suppress Earth, the Krellians will interpret that as weakness, as an opportunity to expand into disputed territories. Klein nodded like she'd expected this. "Good. Let them." The Assembly's been ignoring the Krellian problem for decades, treating it like a border dispute instead of the existential threat it actually is. Maybe if they're forced to face real aggression, instead of just managing complaints from minor species, they'll remember what their military is actually for. "You're playing with fire," Cortez said. "Multiple fires, any one of which could burn everything we've built." "We don't have a choice, James. They gave us 2 options, surrender or fight. I'm choosing fight, but I'm doing it smart. I'm making sure the cost of suppressing us is higher than the cost of leaving us alone." A junior officer approached, tablet in hand, and saluted. "Admiral, we're receiving communication requests from 17 different assembly species. They're all marked priority diplomatic." Cortez glanced at Klein. That was fast. "Fear moves faster than bureaucracy," she said. "Let them wait. Let them wonder what we're thinking, what we're planning. The longer they sit with uncertainty, the more they'll talk themselves into accepting our terms." Thomas watched this exchange and realized he was seeing something most people never witnessed. The moment history pivoted. When decisions made in rooms like this by people like these determined whether billions lived or died. It should have felt more momentous, he thought. There should have been dramatic music, or at least better lighting. Instead, it was just tired people making impossible choices and hoping they were right. "Commander Grayson," Klein said, pulling him from his thoughts. "You've been very quiet. Your intelligence. Give me an assessment. What's the Assembly going to do?" He took a breath, running through everything he'd learned about alien psychology, political structures, historical precedents. "They'll fracture," he said finally. "Not immediately, but within days. Some species will push for immediate military response, but they'll be the minority. Most will want economic sanctions, isolation protocols, ways to punish us without risking direct conflict. The problem is those methods take time to implement and time to work. We'll have a window, maybe 6 months, where we're effectively independent. After that, the pressure starts building." 6 months, Klein repeated. "What can we do with 6 months, Admiral?" Cortez studied the displays, his expression calculating. "We fortify every colony. We accelerate weapons production. We recruit, train, and deploy. And we pray to whatever gods still listen that we've scared them enough to avoid the fight entirely." 3 weeks after the diplomatic incident, as the media had started calling it, Thomas found himself aboard the UED's Retribution, one of the 3 Titan-class warships that had become humanity's entire deterrence strategy. The ship was even more impressive from the inside than it had been from the conference chamber viewport. Corridors stretched for what felt like kilometers, wide enough to drive vehicles through. The crew numbered in the thousands. and entire sections of the ship were dedicated to weapons systems that could crack planets open like eggs. He'd been reassigned. No explanation, just new orders that came directly from Naval Intelligence Command. Report to Retribution, serve as liaison between military operations and diplomatic intelligence. Translation: they wanted someone who understood both worlds, someone who could interpret what the aliens were thinking and help the military respond appropriately. It was a promotion in everything but a title, and it scared him more than he wanted to admit. Captain Raymond Fisher ran the Retribution with the kind of quiet competence that made people follow orders before they realized they'd been given. He was younger than Thomas expected, maybe 45, with dark skin and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. They met in Fisher's ready room, a surprisingly modest space given the ship's enormous size. "Commander Grayson," Fisher said, gesturing to a chair, "I've read your file. Mars Rebellion, the colonial disputes, 4 years in diplomatic intelligence. You've seen the ugly side of things." Thomas sat, feeling the chair adjust automatically to his weight and posture. "Yes, sir. Ugly enough to know this situation could go a lot of different ways, most of them bad." Fisher smiled without humor. "Direct. I appreciate that. Let me be equally direct. We're currently holding a gun to the head of 47 different species, and my job is to make sure they believe we'll pull the trigger. Your job is to help me understand when they're about to call our bluff." "With respect, sir, it's not a bluff. The weapons are real." "The weapons are real," Fisher agreed. "But the willingness to use them? That's always a bluff, Commander. Nobody actually wants to start a war that kills billions. We're counting on them being too afraid to test whether we're serious. The moment they stop being afraid, the moment they think we're hesitating, this whole strategy collapses." Before Thomas could respond, an alert chimed. Fisher tapped his desk console, and a holographic display materialized between them. It showed a tactical map of the local sector, with dozens of markers indicating various ships and installations. "We've got movement," Fisher said, his tone shifting to pure command focus. "Assembly vessels, 15 of them, transitioning into the outer system. They're not broadcasting hostile intent, but they're definitely not here for a friendly visit." Thomas studied the display. The ships were maintaining formation, standard diplomatic escort pattern, but there were too many of them for a simple follow-up meeting. "What species?" "Mixed fleet. 3 Vakri, 4 Torvin, and the rest are smaller species I'd need to look up. They're requesting permission to approach Earth orbit for clarification discussions regarding recent diplomatic misunderstandings." Fisher's expression made clear what he thought of that phrasing. "It's a test," Thomas said. "They want to see how we respond to pressure. If we let them approach, it looks like weakness. If we refuse, it gives them justification to escalate." "Damned either way," Fisher muttered. He stood and moved to the viewport, looking out at the stars. "Admiral Cortez gave me explicit orders. No assembly vessels within lunar orbit without express authorization. But he also said to avoid engagement unless absolutely necessary." He turned back to Thomas. "You understand these people. What happens if I tell them to stop where they are?" Thomas ran through scenarios in his head, playing out diplomatic responses the way he'd been trained. Best case, they comply and demand formal negotiations. Worst case, they interpret it as an act of war, and we're shooting in the next 10 minutes. Middle ground, they test the boundary. See how serious we are. Fisher nodded slowly. "And if I let them approach?" "Then every species in the assembly learns that our threats have limits. Next time it'll be 20 ships, then 50, then a full battle fleet, and by then it's too late to draw a line. So we stop them here." "Yes, sir." Fisher returned to his desk and opened a ship-wide channel. "All hands, this is the captain. We have assembly vessels approaching Earth space. Battle stations, but hold fire unless I give explicit orders. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." He closed the channel and looked at Thomas. "Let's go see if we can avoid starting an interstellar war before lunch." The Bridge of the Retribution was designed for exactly this kind of moment. Every station monitored specific systems, creating a web of information that flowed to the command chair where Fisher could see everything at once. Holographic displays showed the approaching assembly ships in precise detail, updating their positions every fraction of a second. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, no wasted motion, no panic, just professionals doing what they'd trained for. "Communications," Fisher said, settling into the command chair. "Open a channel to the assembly fleet. Let's hear what they have to say." The main view screen flickered, and the face of a Vakri appeared, bioluminescent patterns shifting across his skin in what Thomas had learned to read as carefully controlled aggression. "UED's Retribution. This is Diplomatic Envoy Salakar. We are here under Assembly authority to conduct follow-up discussions with Earth government representatives. We request safe passage to orbit and assurance that your vessels will maintain non-hostile posture." Fisher glanced at Thomas, who shook his head minutely. The phrasing was wrong, too demanding, not enough respect for Earth's sovereignty. This wasn't a request. This was an assertion of authority. "Envoy Salakar," Fisher said, his voice carrying that particular military flatness that could make a suggestion sound like divine law. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Earth space is restricted territory. All vessels must receive authorization before crossing the heliopause. You and your fleet are ordered to hold position pending diplomatic clearance." Salakar's bioluminescence flashed patterns Thomas's implant translated as indignation mixed with disbelief. "Captain, we are not requesting permission. We are operating under Assembly mandate. Your government will comply with established protocols or face consequences." The bridge went silent. Every officer had stopped what they were doing, waiting to see how Fisher would respond to what amounted to a direct threat. Fisher stood, and something in his posture changed. He wasn't a career diplomat like Klein, didn't have decades of practice reading rooms and managing egos. He was military to his core, and military men understood exactly one kind of communication better than any other: force. "Envoy Salakar, let me make something very clear. You are currently in sovereign Earth territory without authorization. That makes you trespassers at best, hostile actors at worst. You have 30 seconds to alter course and exit the system. If you fail to comply, I will interpret your presence as an act of aggression and respond accordingly." "You would not dare," Salakar said, but his bioluminescence betrayed him, flashing colors that Thomas recognized as fear. "You cannot possibly believe we would allow such blatant disrespect of Assembly authority." 20 seconds, Fisher said. Thomas watched the tactical display. The assembly ships hadn't changed course, but they hadn't advanced either. They were hovering at the boundary, waiting to see if Fisher was serious. His hands were sweating. This was it, the moment where deterrence either worked or failed catastrophically. "Weapons," Fisher said quietly. "Target lock on the lead vessel. Fire solution Alpha 3. Target acquired, sir. Solution loaded. 10 seconds, Envoy." The assembly fleet broke formation. Not retreating, not yet, but spreading out, creating distance between vessels in what Thomas recognized as a defensive pattern. They were preparing for a fight, which meant they didn't believe Fisher would actually shoot. "Captain," Thomas said, keeping his voice low, "if we fire first, even a warning shot, they can claim aggression. The political fallout will be someone else's problem," Fisher interrupted. "Right now, my problem is making sure they understand we mean what we say. 5 seconds, Envoy Salakar." The Vakri's image flickered, and for a moment Thomas saw something in those alien features that transcended species barriers. The look of someone realizing they'd miscalculated badly. We are adjusting course. We will withdraw and await proper diplomatic channels." "Smart choice," Fisher said. He made a gesture, and the communications officer cut the feed. The bridge remained silent as they watched the assembly ships slowly, almost reluctantly, turn and begin moving back toward the heliopause. It took nearly 20 minutes for them to fully exit the system, and Fisher didn't move the entire time, didn't sit down or relax his posture. He just stood there, watching, making absolutely certain they understood he would have followed through. When the last ship disappeared from sensors, the tension on the bridge broke like a snapped cable. Officers exhaled, some laughing nervously, others just looking relieved. Fisher finally sat down, and Thomas saw his hands were shaking slightly. "That," Fisher said quietly, "was too damn close." 2 months into what the news networks were calling the independence crisis. Thomas stood in the observation deck of Retribution, watching Earth rotate slowly below. From this distance, it looked peaceful, impossibly fragile, a sphere of blue and white and green that seemed far too delicate to be the center of an interstellar standoff. He'd been thinking a lot about fragility lately, about how quickly things could shatter when enough pressure was applied in exactly the right place. The door behind him hissed open, and he turned to see Captain Fisher approaching, 2 cups of coffee in hand. Real coffee, not the synthetic stuff most of the crew drank. That meant Fisher wanted something beyond casual conversation. "Thought you might need this," Fisher said, offering one of the cups. "You've been up here a lot lately." Thomas accepted the coffee and took a sip. It was good. Rich and dark, and exactly the kind of thing that reminded him Earth was worth fighting for. "Just thinking, sir. Trying to make sense of everything." Fisher joined him at the viewport, staring down at their homeworld. "Find any sense in it?" "Not really. We're in a staring contest with 47 species, and the moment someone blinks, people die. That's not strategy. That's insanity with better branding." "Welcome to command decisions," Fisher said with a bitter smile. "Every choice is wrong. You just pick the option that kills fewer people." He drank his coffee, silent for a moment. "I got new intelligence reports this morning. Want to hear something that'll ruin your day?" "Can't be worse than what I'm already imagining." "The assembly is fracturing, just like you predicted, but not the way anyone hoped. 3 species have withdrawn their support for military action against Earth. That sounds good until you realize 6 others have formed a separate coalition specifically to deal with what they're calling the human problem. They're calling themselves the Security Enforcement Directorate, and they're not interested in diplomacy." Thomas felt his stomach drop. 6 species acting independently. That's worse than the full assembly. No bureaucracy to slow them down, no consensus required. "Exactly. And intelligence says they're pooling resources, building a combined fleet. Current estimates put it at somewhere between 200 and 300 warships, with more being committed every week. They're planning something big, Commander. Something that makes our little standoff with 15 ships look like a playground argument." "When?" "Unknown. Could be months, could be weeks. Our assets inside their command structure are limited, and what we're getting is fragmentary." Fisher turned to face him directly. "But here's the real problem. Even if we see them coming, even if we execute perfect strikes against their staging areas, we can't stop that many ships. 3 Titan-class vessels against 300. The math doesn't work." Thomas set his coffee down on the ledge running along the viewport, his appetite for it suddenly gone. "So what's the plan? We can't win a straight fight. We can't negotiate from this position, and we can't back down without looking weak. Where does that leave us?" "It leaves us needing a miracle," Fisher said, "or something close to it, which is why Admiral Cortez is calling in every favor, every alliance, every connection Earth has ever made. He's trying to find other species who are as frustrated with the assembly as we are, who might be willing to support us or at least stay neutral." "Any success?" Some. The Tyrellian Republic has privately indicated they won't join any action against us. They've got their own grievances with the Assembly, something about trade restrictions and colonial rights. There are a few others expressing similar sentiments, but expressing sympathy and providing actual military support are very different things. Thomas turned back to the viewport, watching clouds swirl across Earth's surface. Somewhere down there, billions of people were going about their lives, most of them only dimly aware that their entire existence hung by a thread. They trusted that someone, somewhere, was handling things. They trusted that the government and the military and people like Fisher and Klein knew what they were doing. He wondered if that trust was misplaced. "I've been thinking about the colonies," Thomas said. "The ones the Krellians hit. All those people who died while the Assembly debated proper responses and proportional interventions. We went through all of this, burned every bridge, threatened total war, because we refused to be helpless like them. But what if we end up in the same place anyway? What if we lose despite everything?" Fisher was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight Thomas hadn't heard before, the sound of a man who'd already made peace with terrible possibilities. "Then at least we lose on our feet instead of our knees. At least we showed them that humanity doesn't roll over for anyone. That there's a cost to pushing us. Maybe that's worth something. Maybe future generations will remember we fought. Future generations won't exist if we start a war that glasses Earth." "No," Fisher agreed. "They won't. Which is why we're not going to start a war. We're going to make absolutely certain that starting a war is so terrifying, so catastrophically expensive, that they choose peace instead." He finished his coffee and set the empty cup aside. "Intelligence also sent me something else. Intercepted communications from inside the Security Enforcement Directorate. Want to know what they're most afraid of?" "Us?" "Not exactly. They're afraid of setting a precedent. Every species in the Assembly that's ever felt marginalized, every colony that's ever wanted independence, every faction that's ever had grievances, they're all watching Earth right now. If we succeed, if we force the Assembly to back down and leave us alone, it proves that defiance works. It proves that the entire galactic order is built on bluff and intimidation rather than actual authority. That terrifies them more than our weapons ever could." Thomas considered this, turning it over in his mind. "So we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting to show everyone else they can fight too." "Exactly. And that's both our greatest strength and our greatest danger. Because if the Assembly lets us win, they lose everything. But if they come at us with overwhelming force and we make good on our threats, if we actually start burning their worlds, the chaos that follows could tear apart centuries of established order. Mutually assured destruction on a galactic scale. Something like that. The old Cold War strategists would recognize the game we're playing. The difference is they had decades to perfect the balance, to establish protocols and fail-safes and communication channels. We're making it up as we go, one crisis at a time." An alert chimed, and Fisher pulled out his tablet, scanning whatever message had just arrived. His expression darkened. "Speaking of crises, we've got another one. There's been an incident at the Proxima colony. Krellian raiders, bigger force than usual. They hit the orbital platforms and 3 surface settlements before the defense force could respond. Casualties? Preliminary reports say 1,200 dead, another 4,000 wounded or missing. The colony governor is screaming for military intervention, wants us to send retribution and hit the Krellian staging areas." Thomas felt anger burn in his chest, hot and immediate. This was exactly what they'd been trying to prevent, exactly why they'd defied the Assembly in the first place. "Can we reach them? How long would it take to get there?" 18 hours at maximum burn. But here's the problem. If we leave Earth space now, while the Security Enforcement Directorate is building their fleet, we leave humanity's homeworld vulnerable. And intelligence suggests the timing of this raid wasn't coincidental. The Krellians are testing us, seeing if we'll abandon our defensive position to chase them. So we just let them murder our people? That's the choice? Fisher's jaw tightened. That's the choice. We can protect Earth, or we can protect the colonies. But we don't have enough ships to do both. This is what happens when you're outnumbered and surrounded. Every decision is a sacrifice. Thomas wanted to put his fist through the viewport, wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. They'd done everything right, played every card they had, and people were still dying. There has to be another option. If you think of one, let me know, Fisher said, because right now, I've got 1,200 dead colonists, a governor demanding action, and orders from Admiral Cortez to maintain position no matter what. I've got to tell those colonists that their dead don't matter as much as Earth's survival, and I've got to make them understand why that's necessary. He looked at Thomas with exhausted eyes. You want to know the real cost of command? It's not making hard choices. It's living with them afterward. 4 months after the diplomatic incident, Thomas found himself back on Earth for the first time since everything started. Not by choice, but because Admiral Cortez had summoned him personally, along with Captain Fisher and Ambassador Klein. When people at that level of authority called a meeting, you didn't ask questions. You just showed up and hoped you weren't about to become a scapegoat for policies that were failing. The meeting took place in Geneva, in one of those anonymous government buildings that looked like every other anonymous government building. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting, conference rooms designed by people who'd never had an original thought in their lives. Thomas sat between Fisher and Klein at a table that could have seated 20, but only held 6. Across from them sat Admiral Cortez, looking like he'd aged a decade in 4 months, and 2 civilians Thomas didn't recognize, but whose bearing screamed high-level intelligence operatives. "Thank you all for coming," Cortez said, which was a polite fiction since none of them had been given a choice. "I'll be direct because we don't have time for anything else. The situation has deteriorated significantly. The Security Enforcement Directorate now has 417 warships committed to what they're calling Operation Compliance. They're planning to enter Earth space in approximately 6 weeks, with enough firepower to overwhelm our defenses through sheer numbers." Thomas felt his mouth go dry. 400 ships. Even if the Titan-class vessels performed perfectly, even if every defense platform and every orbital cannon worked exactly as designed, those numbers represented inevitable defeat. You couldn't hold back an ocean with a handful of sandbags. "We're evacuating," one of the civilians said. She was middle-aged, with sharp eyes, and the kind of voice that suggested she was used to giving orders that decided whether people lived or died. "Selected personnel, critical knowledge, genetic diversity. We've been building hidden colonies in uncharted systems for the last 3 months. If Earth falls, humanity continues somewhere else." "Unacceptable," Klein said, her voice cold enough to frost the room. "We fought for independence. We drew a line. If we run now, everything we did was meaningless." "Every threat we made becomes a lie." "Everything we did was already meaningless," the civilian shot back. "We gambled that we could scare them into leaving us alone, and we lost. Now we're facing annihilation, and pride won't stop that." Fisher leaned forward, his expression carefully neutral. "With respect, ma'am, running doesn't solve the problem. It just delays it. They'll find our hidden colonies eventually, and when they do, we'll be even weaker than we are now. At least here we have defenses, infrastructure, manufacturing capability." The second civilian, an older man with gray hair and calculating eyes, spoke up. "Captain Fisher is correct. Evacuation is not a solution. It's a contingency, a last resort if everything else fails. But we didn't bring you here to discuss running away. We brought you here because we have a different option, one that's considerably more dangerous but potentially more effective." Cortez pulled up a holographic display showing a star system Thomas didn't immediately recognize. "This is the Helix Nebula region, approximately 600 light-years from Earth. 3 years ago, one of our deep space survey teams discovered something there, something we've kept classified at the highest levels. The display zoomed in, focusing on what looked like a derelict structure orbiting a dying star. It was massive, easily dwarfing the Titan-class ships, and its architecture was like nothing Thomas had ever seen. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at. Materials that seemed to shift and change even in the static image. "We believe this is a weapons platform," the woman said. "Built by a species that existed before the current galactic order, before any of the assembly races achieved spaceflight. Our xenoarchaeologists have been studying it for 3 years, and what they've found is both promising and terrifying." Klein stared at the image. "Please tell me you haven't been trying to activate an ancient superweapon without understanding what it does." "We understand what it does," the man said. "It generates a field that disrupts faster-than-light travel across a radius of approximately 50 light-years. Any ship caught in that field when it activates becomes stranded, unable to enter or exit FTL. They're trapped at sublight speeds until the field dissipates." Thomas saw the implications immediately. "You want to activate it when the Security Enforcement Directorate fleet is inside the field radius. Trap them. Make them sitting targets." "Not just trap them," Cortez said. "The field also interferes with their communications, their sensors, their ability to coordinate. 400 ships become 400 individual vessels, blind and deaf and unable to call for help. And while they're trapped, we systematically destroy them with the Titan-class ships." "That's mass murder," Klein said quietly. 400 ships, tens of thousands of personnel. You're talking about genocide." "I'm talking about survival," Cortez said, and there was steel in his voice. "They're coming to Earth with the explicit intention of forcing us into submission or destroying us outright. This is war, Patricia. And in war you use the weapons available. If that weapon happens to be ancient and terrifying, that's not our fault." Fisher was studying the holographic display with the eye of someone trained to find flaws in battle plans. "What's the catch? There's always a catch with things like this." "The catch," the woman said, "is that we don't fully understand the activation mechanism. Our teams have identified what they believe are the control systems, but there's significant risk that activating the platform could have unintended consequences. It might not work at all, or it might work too well and trap our own ships as well as theirs. Or it might do something else entirely," the man added. "Something the original builders intended that we haven't figured out yet. The point is, using this weapon is a gamble with stakes we can't fully calculate." Thomas listened to all of this and felt something cold and sick settling in his gut. This wasn't strategy anymore. This wasn't even desperation. This was rolling dice with the future of humanity and hoping they came up in your favor. "And if it works, if we trap and destroy 400 ships full of aliens who were following orders from their governments, what happens then? The rest of the galaxy doesn't just shrug and accept that we committed mass slaughter." "No," Cortez agreed. "They don't. Which is why if we use this weapon, we do it publicly. We broadcast the activation, we show them exactly what we're capable of, and we make it clear that this is what happens to anyone who threatens Earth. We turn it from a military action into a deterrent so terrifying that no one ever tests us again." Klein laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to commit atrocity as performance art. You want to murder tens of thousands and make sure everyone watches so they know we're capable of it." "I want to save billions," Cortez said, his voice rising. "I want to make absolutely certain that after this no one ever threatens Earth again because they're too afraid of what we might do. Is it monstrous? Yes. Is it necessary? Also, yes. Because the alternative is sitting here and waiting for them to arrive with overwhelming force and kill or enslave everyone we're supposed to protect." The room fell silent. Thomas looked around the table at these people who held the fate of Earth in their hands and realized that none of them wanted to make this choice. Klein's face was pale. Fisher's jaw was clenched so tight Thomas could see the muscles jumping, and Cortez looked like a man who'd already decided, but hated himself for it. "There's one more thing," the woman said. "The activation requires a crew on site. Someone has to physically interface with the control systems, monitor the activation sequence, and make real-time adjustments if things go wrong. It's not something we can do remotely. Whoever activates that platform is staying there, at least until the field dissipates. That could be hours, or it could be weeks. And if the Security Enforcement Directorate figures out where the field is coming from, they'll send everything they have left to destroy that platform and everyone on it." "So it's a suicide mission," Fisher said flatly. "It's a high-risk mission with uncertain extraction timeline," the man corrected. But the evasion was transparent. Thomas looked at the holographic display. At that ancient structure built by a species long dead for purposes they could only guess at, and wondered what those ancient builders would think about humans using their technology to commit mass murder. Would they approve? Would they be horrified? Or would they just see it as another species doing what was necessary to survive in a hostile universe? "When do you need a decision?" Klein asked. 24 hours, Cortez said. "After that, we won't have enough time to position the Titan-class ships and the activation crew before the Security Enforcement Directorate arrives. This is it. This is the moment where we decide what kind of species we want to be." The magnitude of the choice before them sunk in with the weight of a collapsing star. For the first time in human history, they were contemplating wielding a weapon so vast and so devastating that it could strand entire fleets, leaving hundreds of warships powerless and vulnerable to destruction on a scale never before witnessed. Thomas Grayson sat quietly at the head of the conference table, feeling the heaviness in the air like an invisible fog. The ancient weapon in the Helix Nebula, a relic of a civilization long dead, promised a path through this disaster, but it came at a cost beyond comprehension. The room was suffused with tension, comparable to the darkest moments of Earth's past wars. Every person present was haunted not only by the imminent threat of destruction by the Security Enforcement Directorate, but also by the moral abyss into which they were now staring. Admiral Cortez broke the silence. "The tool is ours, but the burden comes with it. Use it. And we flood the galaxy with a message. Cross us, and you will be isolated, helpless, and annihilated. This could end the war in hours, or it could ignite a war that burns down systems already too fragile to support life." Ambassador Klein's eyes glinted with fierce resolve as she countered. "Do we really have a choice? What other option remains when every star fleet outnumber us tenfold? We risk survival through compliance or guaranteed extinction from total war." Thomas found himself grappling with a swirl of emotions that had twisted and coiled inside him since the beginning of this crisis. Fear, raw and primal, mingled with an ember of hope, stubborn and defiant. Somewhere deep beneath layers of military protocol and political calculations, something essential burned within him, the very core of human endurance, forged through millennia of struggle and survival. "Our colonies burn while we waste time debating guilt over untested weapons," Thomas spoke quietly but firmly. "Every moment we hesitate is another death mark on our history. We owe it to the billions yet to come, even if that means bearing the horror of what this weapon represents." The woman in charge of the scientific teams who had studied the weapon, Dr. Elena Vasquez, cleared her throat. "Activation will require a hand on the controls. The interface is ancient but functional. Whoever goes must be prepared to remain on site in the Helix Nebula's system, possibly for weeks. There's no guarantee of extraction once activated. The invading fleets could find us before the dispersal." Thomas's heart sank at the thought of someone volunteering for a mission almost certainly a suicide run. Eyes shifted around the room, settling on Fisher and then returning to him. His mouth was dry despite the urgency pressing down with unforgiving pressure. Admiral Cortez's voice softened. "It will be no ordinary soldier. We need someone with the tactical mind to react, the psychological resilience to endure isolation, and the human spirit to stand when everything else falls. Commander Grayson, you are nominated to lead this mission." Silence followed, thick and suffocating. Thomas barely registered the nods of agreement. His mind was a storm of doubt and determination. This was it, the fulcrum on which humanity's fate would pivot. Over the next days, preparations began in a fevered frenzy. The Retribution and its sister Titan-class ships coordinated to safeguard the path to the Helix Nebula region, while specialized teams of engineers, xenotechnologists, and military strategists tailored the ancient device for activation. Thomas was briefed exhaustively, every possibility weighed and dissected, every contingency planned except the unpredictable terror of confrontation. On board the mission craft bound for the Helix Nebula, Thomas sat alone for a moment, staring out at the star field rushing past. Reflection crowded in, memories of Earth's battered colonies, of families lost and futures stolen. He wondered what silence awaited them at the superweapon, what it meant to carry the weight of civilization in his hands. There was fear, yes, but also resolve. If humanity was to survive, they had to show strength unlike any before, raw, unyielding, and unafraid to stare into the abyss. Behind him, Captain Fisher entered, carrying a secured comm unit. "Whatever happens, you're not alone. The Titan-class vessels are running close cover, and Earth is with you, every step, every heartbeat." Thomas nodded, wrenching a rough smile from the tension in his jaw. "Then let them see what happens when humanity fights for more than survival, when we fight for the right to be free." The comm buzzed, the final call. The activation countdown began. As the command deck lights dimmed and the ancient facility woke from millennia of dormancy, the Helix Nebula's silent shadows stirred with an ominous pulse. The weapon's gargantuan structures flickered in the dim glow, alive once more. Out beyond, the enemy fleet entered the field. Trapped as radio messages sputtered into void, unable to jump or communicate, a thunderstorm of fire and steel rained down on the stranded invaders. Titan-class beams tore across the darkness. Systematic, cruel, decisive. But even in victory, a deeper war loomed, political tremors shaking the fragile bonds of a galaxy that now knew Earth was not a civilization to be trifled with. And in the silent aftermath, as the ancient weapon hummed quietly into stillness, Thomas understood a greater battle had only just begun, proving to all that humanity's savage, stubborn defiance was not a curse, but a force that demanded respect. The countdown wasn't just a sequence of numbers. It was a descent into the abyss of uncertainty for all humanity. Thomas stood at the control interface deep within the ancient weapon's command center, surrounded by ghostly hums of alien machinery and whispers of civilizations long gone. His fingers hovered over the activation controls. The weight of every life on Earth and beyond pressed into his shoulders like the vast coldness of space itself. Memories of loved ones, lost friends on distant colonies, and innocents caught in this escalating war flickered unbidden through his mind. Doubt clawed at him. Was this act the salvation they sought, or the doom they invited? His breath was steady, but inside, turmoil roared. Behind him, a crackling voice cut through the silence. Captain Fisher's calm, stalwart presence reminded him why he was chosen. Whatever happens after this, humanity will remember today, not just for survival, but for the courage it took to stand. Fisher's resolve was contagious, a lifeline anchored in the storm. The weapon awoke as Thomas engaged the interface. Power surged, shaking the very nebula they rested in. Outside, distant stars flickered as the immense field began to ripple through space-time, affecting a cage that snared the approaching Security Enforcement Directorate fleet like moths drawn to an overwhelming light. Silence fell on the Retribution and Allied vessels as sensors flagged the enemy trapped in sublight speeds, confusion and fear blooming in their ranks. For hours, the battle raged, not just with lasers and missiles, but with raw will and unbending defiance. Earth's forces struck with precision born of desperation, wrenching victory from impossible odds. But the cost was terrible. Human lives lost in the firestorm. The ancient weapon's toll on Thomas and his crew was unknown, its mechanisms alien and inscrutable. When the pulse settled, the galaxy understood Earth had altered the balance irrevocably. The aftermath was layered with uneasy victory. Political tremors shook distant alliances. Some species marveled at humanity's audacity, others trembled at the precedent set. Thomas stood looking at Earth from the weapon's observation dome, knowing this was no end but a beginning of new wars, tougher negotiations, and a legacy carved from flame and steel. For all the loss, humanity had reclaimed its place not as a supplicant, but as a force demanding respect. The battle was over. The war for the human spirit was just starting. The vast emptiness of the Helix Nebula held a silent promise, but also an unforgiving coldness. As the ancient weapon hummed quietly in the wake of its deadly pulse, Thomas sat alone in a dimly lit chamber, the weight of what they had done pressing heavily on him. The tangled web of victory and loss lay bare before his weary mind. Their strike had shattered the invading fleets, crippling the Security Enforcement Directorate's offensive before a single world could burn in this war. The galaxy had been shown Earth's will, fierce, unyielding, and prepared to pay any price for freedom. But peace, Thomas knew, was a fragile flame. Back on Earth, the political tremors began almost immediately. Some assembly species recoiled in horror, accusing humanity of monstrous genocide. Others whispered quietly in dark halls, recognizing that the balance of power had shifted. Trembling diplomats recalibrated alliances, uncertain whether to embrace or shatter the fragile order they'd built over centuries. The cosmic status quo was shattered like a glass underfoot, leaving shards cutting every path forward. Thomas thought of the colonists lost, the lives snuffed out by alien raids, and then the war that had consumed so many more. Faces flashing through his mind in merciless cycles, reminders of why they had fought. Captain Fisher's voice came softly through the comm. "Commander Grayson, sensors detect a transmission, encrypted but unmistakably assembly in origin. It's an ultimatum." Thomas leaned forward. "What does it say?" "The assembly demands immediate cessation of all hostilities and full deactivation of the Helix weapon. They warn that continued use of such devices will prompt a coalition response that exceeds even the Security Enforcement Directorate's capabilities." The threat was clear. They'd awakened a sleeping giant, an entire galaxy unwilling to tolerate defiance from a single rising power, no matter how tenacious or justified. Thomas closed his eyes, battling the guilt twisting inside him. Had they saved humanity, or condemned it to endless war? Ambassador Klein's words echoed in his mind. "We fought for the right to decide our own future, not submission." The choice before them was no longer a matter of military strategy or political maneuvering. It was a test of human resolve. Days passed as Earth's leaders debated, as citizens braced for possible retaliation, and as Thomas prepared for what might come next. The weapon, ancient and inscrutable, awaited further orders. But so too did the fragile threads of peace and survival. In a final meeting aboard Retribution, Klein spoke for all of humanity. "Let the galaxy watch. We do not claim to be perfect. We carry flaws, pain, and scars. But we are not cowards, not slaves. We choose to stand, not just for Earth, but for every soul who dreams of freedom among the stars. Thomas felt the fire inside kindle anew. The war might rage